Many years ago now, there was a popular game show on television, and those of you who are older may remember it. The show aired from 1950 to 1974, and on it, contestants were asked silly trick questions which they almost invariably failed to answer correctly, and if they did, or failed to come up with the answer in a short period of time, a buzzer went off, and that buzzer had the name of Beulah the Buzzer, and the MC, one of which was Bob Barker, then told them that since they had failed to tell the truth, they would have to pay the consequences. Consequences consisted of elaborate stunts, some of them done in the studio, some done outside, some that day, some had to be done during the week, and then they would come back the next week after that. Some of the stunts were funny. All of them were embarrassing, and each show would begin with the announcer's words, "Don't go away, folks. It's time to play Truth or Consequences." Yes, all of us old people remember that. In fact, you can go on YouTube and still watch the show. I did that this week and pulled up old black and white videos from Truth or Consequences, and you could see Bob Barker when he had black hair, and it was a lot of fun to do that. Now, we're continuing a series that we started now a couple months ago, I guess it is, a series called A Person of Faith, and it has to do with a man by the name of, well, we know him as Abraham, but he started off as Abram, a man of faith, and his wife started off as Sarai and then became Sarah. And in our study today, we're in Genesis chapter 20, we shall find that Abraham is confronted with an opportunity to tell the truth or not. And we shall see that his response to this opportunity has some very serious consequences, not only for him, but for everybody else. So for Abraham today, we're going to play Truth or Consequences. Genesis chapter 20, verse 1. Genesis chapter 20, verse 1. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and for a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her, but God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You're as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now, back you up between the last time, 2 weeks ago, and now, the story has jumped ahead a little bit. Abraham in the story, he's now Abraham. He's no longer Abram, he's now Abraham. And he has just witnessed the destruction that God told him would happen. God came to some cities on the plain of the Jordan called Sodom and Gomorrah, and their sin, their wickedness was so great that God said he would judge them. Now, if you remember the story back a little ways ago, that when Abraham and Lot came back from Egypt, the land was not big enough for the both of them, so they divided it up. And Abraham said to Lot, "Well, you take whichever you want." And Lot looked over, he said, "You could either have the hills of Canaan, or you could have the plain and the river of the Jordan Valley," and he chose the Jordan Valley. And it just happened to be on that plain were two cities called Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot pitched his tent next to the city of Sodom. But we know that that was not a good idea, because in the city of Sodom there was such great wickedness that there weren't even 10 people in that city who were believers in God that would give God reason not to destroy that city. So God said, "I'm going to destroy them." So the two angels led Lot, his wife, and two daughters out of the city, and the Lord rained down sulfur on that city on the plain, and it destroyed everything and everyone in it. And if that wasn't bad enough, Lot's wife, as they were being led out of the city, God had said, don't even look back at them. Don't look at what's going on. You just keep going straight ahead. But Lot's wife couldn't handle the temptation, and she turned around, and she too was destroyed. It says that she became like a pillar of salt. Now, what was it that would cause God to do such terrible destruction to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? And we are told it's simple. It was their sin. And their sins were listed. There were a number of them. There was probably the one that they're known for the most is overt sexual perversion. Then there was shamelessness, arrogance, pride, unconcern for people in need. And those are all bad things. But the greatest sin of theirs was none of those. Their greatest sin was worshiping other gods. And so because of that, God destroyed them. And Abraham had been a witness to the fact that this had taken place. But God also spared Lot and his two daughters because Abraham asked him to. So it's now time for Abraham and his family to move on, perhaps because nobody could live in that area anymore after that destruction. But they moved west toward the Mediterranean. They came to the edge of Philistine territory. To our knowledge, Abraham had never been there before and had no knowledge of these Philistines. But suddenly we're told that he's afraid. Why? It's Sarah again. She's very beautiful. Does this sound familiar? About 25 years before this, Abraham and Sarah, back then Abram and Sarai, had to leave the land of Canaan because of a famine, and they went to Egypt where there was food. But as they neared Egypt, Abram became afraid. Why? Because he looked at his wife and said, she's very beautiful. And I'm afraid what's going to happen is when I get to Egypt, the men there are going to think the same thing, and they're going to want to take her to be theirs, and in the process, they're going to kill me so they can take her. Well, I don't want to see that happen, so here's what I want you to do, Sarai. I want you to tell them that you're my sister. Because in that day, if you wanted someone to be your wife, you had to ask your brother's permission, and you have to treat him well. So they'll treat me well once they see how beautiful you are and want to take you to be their wife. And it happened just like he said. In fact, news about Sarai and her beauty got all the way up to the top to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, well, I've got to check this out, and he did. And he said, I want her to be my wife. And he did treat Abraham very well. Abraham, of course, is not real crazy about these new living arrangements, but at least he's alive, and he's good with that. Maybe he didn't tell the truth exactly, but everyone seems to be the better for it. I mean, right? I'm treated well. The Pharaoh's got a beautiful wife. Everything's good. And then things change because the Pharaoh starts getting sick and his family, really sick. And we are told that the sickness was given to him by God as a punishment for taking Abraham's wife, the mother of a great nation, or to be a great nation. And Pharaoh figures this out, and he calls Abraham in, and he goes, all right, what are you doing? I realize why we're so sick. And it's not just me, it's my wife, my other wives, my kids, everybody else, we're sick. And this is because I figured it out. It's because 2 and 2 makes 4. I wasn't sick before. I took Sarah to be my wife, and now I'm sick. And you worship another God. It must be your God that's doing this to me. Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you lie? Take your wife and go home, because I can't deal with this anymore. And so they left. So that was 25 years ago. And once again, Abram is going to a new land, and once again, he's afraid. Well, what should I do? I don't know these people. I don't know these Philistines. Surely they're bad people. Surely they don't worship our God. Surely they must be, therefore, worshipers of other gods. Therefore, I have to think the worst. They will certainly kill me to take my beautiful wife. Can I tell the truth that I'm her husband? I know I shouldn't lie, but what did I do the last time? Oh yeah, the last time what I did was I had Sarah tell them that she was my sister. I mean, that's the only option I have, right? It's the only way out of this. I mean, what bad could possibly come from doing something wrong? There was a very rich lady who accidentally hit and killed a neighborhood dog with her Cadillac car. And she was very distraught, very sad, very remorseful. And she says, I can't leave the dog there. I've got to do something about it. She stopped her car, backed up where the dog was. She tried to see if, somehow she could revive the dog. Nothing worked. Nothing happened. And so she decided she was going to take the dog. So she went to the back of her car where she had a shopping from a very expensive store where she had just been, and she emptied out the contents. She took the expensive store bag out of her car. She went over to where the dog was, and she put the dead dog in the expensive store bag. Then she took the bag, put it in the back seat of her car, and was going to drive somewhere to dispose of the animal. Well, on her way, she needed to get gas, so she stopped at a gas station. And when she did, she realized, I need to use the restroom. So she went to the restroom. And as she was coming back out around the corner, she noticed there was another woman who was coming up to the back door of her car. She watched. That woman looked around, opened the back door, saw the expensive store bag, picked it up and took it, closed the door, and walked away. Well, the woman said, I got to see this. So she followed her. That woman got in her car, drove off, and stopped at a nearby restaurant, the other woman following her to watch what was happening. The woman with the now bag went into the restaurant with the bag, sat down at the table. The other woman watching this looked at the menu, placed an order, the waitress left, and then she turned, took the bag, put it on the table, and opened it up. She screamed, fainted, and hit the floor. The people in the restaurant called 911. The ambulance came. They tried to revive her, picked her up, hauled her off to the ambulance, and as the stretcher was going out the door, the waitress called after her, Ma'am, you forgot your bag. Actions have consequences. Things we do wrong have consequences, not just for us, but for others. Abraham told a lie. What bad could come from that? After all, I'm just doing it to save myself. But you see, our actions don't just affect us, they affect others. Abraham should have remembered that from the last time. When Abraham told the people of Gerar that Sarah was his sister, they believed him and thought she was an eligible bachelorette. And of course, being that she's very beautiful, the king is first in line and he takes her to be his wife. Now, I preached this at the first service this morning, and Dustin Dornbos comes up to me afterwards and he goes, so how old was Sarah at this point? She's like, 80, I mean, this is 80s. Let's just say 80s. Say she's 80 years old. He goes, and the king wanted her to be his wife because she was very beautiful. He said she was probably the most beautiful 85 years old in the history of the world, that the king, who is more likely younger than her, would want her to be his wife. So even if you're 85, there's still hope. She must have been incredible that the king would want her to be his wife. Well, God has seen enough, and he steps in. And he comes to King Abimelech, and he tells him that he's going to die because he's taken a married woman to be his wife. And his response is, she's a what? Verse 4. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't she also say, he's my brother? I've done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. God, I didn't know she was his wife. I'm telling you the truth. He said she was his sister. She said he was her brother. Honest God, I'm doing what the law requires. How can you kill me and my people for this man's lie? I am suffering for his actions because actions have consequences. There was an Illinois man who meant well when he removed sandbags from a Mississippi River levee, and he was convicted in a court for causing a catastrophe during a devastating flood. The jury found James Scott guilty of sabotaging the West Quincy, Missouri levee, a charge which carries a sentence of 10 years to life. With the Mississippi River already several feet above flood stage, the breach allowed the river to inundate 14,000 acres of farmland. Water ripped through the business district of that area, destroying scores of buildings and homes and causing 2 gas tanks at service stations to explode. And it closed a bridge for 71 days, a bridge which was the only bridge across the Mississippi for 200 miles. And someone asked him why he did it. He said, because I saw that there was a weak area in the levee, and I thought that if I removed a few sandbags, it would grab the attention of my supervisor who would come and fix it. Well, it didn't. And the result was destruction on an incredible scale. Was it well-intentioned? Perhaps, but with disastrous consequences. Verse 6. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die. And early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials when he told them all that had happened, and they were very much afraid. And then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, what have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You've done things to me that should not be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? Abraham said, I said to myself, there's surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. So God knows that King Abimelech has acted lawfully, and he's not going to judge him for what Abraham has done. In fact, he said, I kept you from consummating the relationship so that wasn't a problem. So all you need to do is give her back. And I'm sure when the king told his fellow leaders about this, they all said, give her back, please, and do it now. And then Abimelech summons in the guy who caused all this whole mess, this mess that could have had him and all of his people killed. And he asks him the same question that somebody asked the guy who removed the sandbags from the levee. What were you thinking? Why did you do this? Do you know what could have happened because of what you did? So Abraham said, well, I have this beautiful 85-year-old wife, and I was afraid. And I was sure, because you people don't worship our God, that you're going to be bad people, and that you would probably do something really bad to me, and because my wife is so beautiful that you would probably kill me. And actually, I wasn't technically lying, because we do have the same father, just not the same mother. And then God made me leave my homeland, and I gave my wife a chance to show her love to me by saying she's my brother. Really? Have you ever heard such a lousy set of excuses in your life? My dog ate my homework, the devil made me do it, this is God's fault, the woman that you gave me, it's all there. Despite his terrible excuses, amazingly, the story ends well. In verse 14, because Abimelech is kind to him. Verse 14, then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you, live wherever you like. To Sarah he said, I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls, so they could have children again, for the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. So the story actually ends well. And it's a story of potential disaster, but it's also a story of great grace and mercy on the part of Abimelech and God. And it also points out that Abram, although he started off as a man of faith, a person of faith, he had moments where he just went off the rails. It's like it all went out the window. He didn't remember anything about this God that he had faith in. Suddenly, when a fearful situation comes along, he's no longer trusting in God. Nowhere does it say he consulted God when he was concerned about the situation. It just said he came up with his own plan, and what happened as a result? Well, in this case, there were consequences that were temporary and that could have been permanent. But it didn't end that well. Didn't end that way. You see, the point is that actions have consequences. And sometimes we take actions because we lose sight of God. We no longer have faith in God, and then we come up with our own plan. A plan that is based on our thinking without consulting God. We no longer are people of faith. And then when we do that, we get into all kinds of trouble, and we go, why did that happen? It's because we didn't stay where we needed to stay. We didn't have an attitude towards God that we needed to continue. We lost sight of all that, and we just started coming up with our own ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of those ideas end up being destructive for us. And it's not just for us. It doesn't just affect us. When we do something wrong, it doesn't just affect me. It affects the people around me in ways that I can't even imagine. And so I have to remember that. When I'm starting to come up with my own plan and not having faith in God, this could hurt other people too besides me. And so I need to stick to having faith in God. Because those things are what bring peace and joy in my life. Those are the things, having faith in God, that will get rid of the fear that I'm feeling. Not my plans, but God's plan. So the next time we're tempted to think, well, maybe I'll just do something else besides what God wants, think twice, because it could be disastrous, not only for you, but for the people that you love. Don't do it. Be a person of faith.